And I remember very distinctly the conversation between the pilot and co-pilot, saying, "We're going down." That's obviously a stomach sinking feeling. And it's funny the things that flash through your head when you're, probably going to die. I've been married, I think, 10 months. And I remember thinking about Bridget, and I remember thinking about camp. We'd only just purchased it from my parents, and thinking like, oh, what can I do to live? And just took a deep breath, braced against the seat in front of me, and waited for it.
Welcome to the Carpe Momentum podcast. Today we have my friend Jeffrey Trufant on the show. Thanks for being here, man.
Thank you, dude. Really glad to be here.
Today the setting is at a familiar place to both of us, a place where not only I became a camper to counselor, but now helping on the video side, but
probably became a young man, a man.
This is where I became a man.
A Tross man.
A Tross man,
Yeah.
Exactly. And this man was an instrumental part of that. And giving some context, he is now one of the part owners of this camp.
Yeah.
But yeah, take us back. I know you grew up here on these grounds. You went away for a little bit, and now you're back here. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so this is, we're at Camps Catalia and Chausatonga, girls and guys camp in Western North Carolina. It's a family business, so I, myself and two brothers have taken over with our families from my parents, Anna and David Trufant, who bought the camps in the 90s and ran it for over 30 years. And recently, stepping into leadership, it's been crazy because obviously we grew up here from the time we were little. It's kind of a charmed upbringing, right? When you have a summer camp at your fingertips, we've got, the lakes and the gym and tennis courts, dining hall, lots of area to run and play, lots of woods to explore in. I grew up doing a lot of the activities that we now get to teach. So climbing, paddling, biking, horseback riding, archery, riflery, arts and crafts, the whole 9 yards, and having the fun atmosphere, at least in the summers, and a lot of space throughout the rest of the year to play in those things. So it's been fun going from being a kid here, going through the journey myself of being a camper, a junior counselor, and I was your junior counselor one year.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, he was my JC2 1 year. A very formative time of my life as a young, I think I was 11 or 12.
Yeah, I think it was back in 2010.
Yeah, 2010.
And then, let's see, and then becoming a counselor, I ran our paddling staff for a few years. And then I took a couple of years away. I worked for a company called Backroads. We did cycling tours all over the world, and then came back as a program director, and then stepped into ownership and direction.
Gosh, so. That's wild. I want to take it before we move on from your story a little bit, from what brings you here today. When you were here, you were on paddling staff. I remember that you were leading paddling staff. Kind of what was it like going away from this place, a place that was so familiar to you, to then go out, not just of the state, this country, all over the world? I'd love to hear a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, well, I think all of us, I think about the campers who come here, and it's an essential part of, I guess, just being human, that we have to grow in independence. We have to step outside of our comfort zones. We have to be willing to welcome the next adventure as it comes. And for campers, a lot of them, it's coming to camp. And then once you've grown up here your whole life, you have to have something like that for yourself as you grow older. And for me, obviously going to college is a part of that for many people. And I ended up taking a couple of years out of college, and I still worked at camp in the summers, but I worked internationally. I went to Nepal and bounced around Southeast Asia some, did some marketing work as well as whitewater and other guide work, various places around the world, and then would come back here. And then after college, I took a break from camp as well. And that's when I led those biking tours. I think just having that space to grow in independence and figure out your loves and what's challenging for you as well in an environment that's a little more uncomfortable and challenging personally. It's a great part of, becoming fully yourself, getting to know yourself better. So that was an important part for me, I think, to be able to come back to camp as a director and be able to give fully of myself. I needed to kind of know a little bit more what I liked, what was hard for me, what I wanted to pursue, and being able to step away from this atmosphere really helped me to see clearly some things that I really wanted to bring back here, but also many things that I really missed about camp,
Ooh,
especially I think just the focus on the mission, the values, the feeling of like family, both working with family, but also just like the camp family, like the people you work with here become really close friends, and to have that atmosphere was really special, and I missed it when I was gone.
I'm
So
sure. I'm sure. I mean, I can't imagine going out because, and give it a little context. I mean, for those who don't know what Backroads is, you're basically like a trip guide, trip leader in
yeah,
some exotic places,
I
doing some.
I mostly did their cycling tours.
Okay.
And actually the primary spot I worked was Ireland. So I was there for them for 3 seasons, about May to October. And my first, I was with the company for 5 years overall, from 2016 on. My first season with them, I worked mostly in the American West, so a little bit in Bryson Zion, Yellowstone, and then a lot of time in Glacier. Um, and the idea with Backroads, it's an amazing company, but you primarily road biking. They also do hiking trips and probably a lot of other stuff now. They keep growing, but we would hike from just beautiful camping or hotel destination to destination, or take bikes as well, and be able to stay in these amazing spots and enjoy this beautiful, national park, or a foreign country, or wherever it was. So I worked with them first out in the American West, then a lot in Europe, and then bounced around here and there, some other places, Hawaii. Ended up managing a trip for them for a little while in my home state. So I went
Wow.
from Greenville, South Carolina up to Asheville, North Carolina. Had a blast with that. And then once COVID hit, that was really, I think for many of us, a grounding time to ask like, oh, what's important?
Yep.
What am I missing? For me, one of those things was just like, I loved my work with them, but I wanted something that was a little bit more substantial in its terms of values and focus. And I found that I knew that camp had that. And that was one of the things that pulled me back here, was just, a consistent community focus at our summer camps, a shared core values. And that was something that really pulled me in.
Love that. Love that. And tell us just a little bit about that transition when you came back and now kind of the role you're in today. You mentioned it with you and your brothers.
Yeah.
What does it look like today from, Backroads, pre-COVID to now today, what you're leading?
Prior to stepping away, I was like heading a small, paddling department within camp. Coming back and being in charge of like much vaster management of the business and, every department at camp, it's just a totally new skill set. So it's been really fun to learn. It keeps us on our toes, but it's one thing to be a great paddling guide, and it's another to be a great, boss and business owner and director to many different, the staffs that we have and functions that we have going on simultaneously. So that's been a learning curve, but a really fun one. And being able to learn from our staff and get to know them better has been, it's been a joy. There are obviously challenging moments, and running camp through COVID was also really challenging, like trying to provide an environment that was fun, but also, safe, I guess, through times where, our public consciousness on matters of health was, becoming much stricter. Those were all challenging moments, but we've come out a lot stronger from all of that, and learning those new skill sets of personnel management, and as well as just like I'm a very like detail oriented person, and focused a lot on structure, and learning the importance of just like making sure that you love your job enough to make sure that you're having fun and participating, and like taking the time to go on the trips with counselors and kids occasionally, and make sure that you're meeting them where they are, and not always just being the person who's like, hey, are we on schedule?
Yeah.
But being the person who's able to be, out there playing as well is really important.
Love that. I think that's really important for those who are listening who might be in a job where they're not either embracing the mission or embracing play within their work, or they might be thinking about making a jump but are scared to do that. What does that look like for you? Is it like a wake up call of like, oh man, I need to that balance. How do you have that balance within work? Because it's so easy to forget about the mission. It's so easy to forget about just be on the logistics side, which I think is very important. And I think just want to affirm you, you're very skilled in that department to be able to keep a place like this on time. But what does that look like for you on a daily basis to be able to get back to the mission? Is it time away, then coming back in, or what does that look like?
Well, I think time away is a wake-up call, but even I think wherever we are, when I remember one time it was in like that break in college, and I was having like kind of like a personal crisis. I was in Nepal doing safety kayaking, and I was like kind of freaking out about like, what am I doing with my life? And I had all these things that were going around in my head, and I went down the street and I found a church, and I went in and I talked to the priest there, and he could barely understand English, and I'm just like spewing all this stuff to him, and he looked at me and he goes, whoa, 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 he's like, slow down, buddy. And he goes, be friendly with your troubles.
Ooh.
And
Ooh.
I have thought about that often, because I think often it's so easy to distract ourselves. It's so easy to, like, instead of taking a time in silence or go on a walk or try to work through whatever angst we're feeling, it's really easy to like turn on a Netflix or start scrolling on our phones or whatever, things that, these are great tools and we often treat them like toys. And to be able to take the time, though, to make sure that when we have troubles, when we have some of that angst, when we have that gut check, that we're being friendly with it, that we're getting to know it, asking, it doesn't have to rule our lives, but asking like, hey, what can I learn from this? Like, if I'm really struggling with where I am, if I'm really having like a lot of angst or reservations, or this doesn't feel like it's a good fit, it's probably better to break up sooner than later and find something that really is. And we might have reasons that we have to be in something beyond what we like. Like, our gut isn't the only ruler of what we do and who we are. But I think it's important to pay attention to those things as data points for to check in on our life. Are we becoming the person that we want to become? And do we have a clear vision? Are we taking the time to develop a vision of who we want to be? And that's something like doing my work now, like knowing that was so important in my life, to try to take the time and make sure that I was being accountable to myself to take the time to develop that vision of who I want to be. One of the things that I love doing with my job now as a camp director is, we have 500 or so kids who come through here each summer, and being able to talk to them about that, and to be able to set aside quiet time where our sessions are long, 2 to 5 weeks, and to be able to have that silent time where kids are unplugged, and whether they, know it or not, they're starting to form, take some space where they can think about who they want to be, think about who the counselors are that are really making an amazing impression on them, and who they're kind of striving to be like. So I think those are really important gifts that I received from other people, like that priest in Nepal, or that now hopefully I hope that our work and mission is able to carry on and help younger people, and it's a continuing process, but help younger people start to form that vision for themselves.
I think that's beautiful. I think it's to be able to not only be in that valley yourself, but then to have that realization, to have those mentors, those experiences, to then come back. What a meaningful mission to be able to impart, see the gifting in counselors and campers, and be able to pull that out and then send them forth into the world. And just speaking from personal experience, this place has been such a place for me of that formation in my own life, in that kind of transitional period mid-college. Coming back here for the first time since a camper really was a place where so many mentors, experiences here that really set me on the path that I am today. Yeah. And so just want to affirm what you're doing here.
And our world needs people who live intentionally.
Yes.
Right? Who seize the moment.
Who seize the moment. But yeah, intentionality, I think that's big. Not only being able to feel that gut, feel that kind of tug on the heart, but to take action. Yeah. And even for you, to come home, and to realize that like there was a meaningful mission in front of you the whole time. Yeah. And now to step into that, it's beautiful. Do you feel like that sense of mission of heart is propelling you forward even in the hard days? Speaking to someone who might be like, like you said, maybe have that gut, but the hard days are feeling endless.
Yeah.
But once you step into that mission, do you feel like it's propelling you forward?
Yeah, well, and I think like once you know your why and you're like, this is something I really want to do and this is why, like I think it's really important that we have this space where kids can, function more freely and start to ask these deeper questions and look at a night sky that's filled with stars and sit by a fire and form good friendships and have, in all of those experiences, something that calls out to the deeper, it calls them deeper into themselves and into knowledge of the world and those around them. Like once you have a why that's powerful, and it may be something that, you know, I feel like a summer camp one, Stars and Fires, like those are very distinct to me, but what anybody's might be, like as whatever career you're in, those things are like once you know your why there, why you're doing it, whether it's to provide for a family or yourself or because you love the career itself and see the way that it serves the community, where your gifts meet a community's need. Once you see that and you understand that you're contributing in that way, well, you can have bad days, but it's not a foundation shaking moment. And that's really important, to be able to have that stability for yourself and to be able to give that stability as a gift to your community.
Gosh, love that. Love that. And touched on it real briefly. I feel like this has also been a place where you found the life that you're living in right now,
Yeah.
meeting your now wife and baby, speaking a little bit into that. We're in your beautiful little cabin here today. Again, just want to affirm stepping into the mission, God's got you there for a reason, because there's other pieces of the puzzle where you embracing that has led to literally more life.
Yeah. I mean, we're very blessed. It's really cool. So
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, speaking of mission, of stepping into something, even if you're there still is adversity. There's still struggle. And there's a story and experience that I want to press into and ask and give you the floor to speak into. For those who don't know, you lived an experience that not many people on planet Earth have gone through. And I would like you to share a little bit about how you survived a plane crash, just getting right to the heart of it. And just want to give you the floor to kind of speak into how that was, what happened, and give a space to speak to people who might be going through something very hard and how to have hope amidst that.
Yeah, well, thanks for the introduction. And talk about having bad days.
Gosh.
and knowing your why and getting through those. Let's see, at this point it was 2 years ago, and we actually had a friend was up here dropping his child off for camp, and he had been my counselor, and he had flown up, and he was gonna just take kind of a flight around the mountains to see the Blue Ridge, and I asked if I could hop in the plane, and it obviously, like, we'll break it down a little bit more, but it ended up crashing, and it was a really hard summer. It was right in the middle of our busiest time of the year, but to be able, I think what got me through that was having the experiences at, in the outdoors when I was a kid, like, the grit that can often build, and the presence of mind and calmness that it can build, and having the support of, my wife, my family around me, like the relationships, people were coming out of the woodwork, old college friends and roommates, and to be able to express support and to be with us, and that is really life-changing. And I'm very fortunate that being able to have had that much support around, but also being able to have been in a spot where I really knew, like, even as that plane was going down, like, I was like, I might die, and I'm really glad that I was living the way that I was while it was happening. That was a huge gift. So the day was June 16th of 2022. So we were actually like 2 weeks into our biggest time of the year. And I had been offered to hop in a plane. Actually, I kind of elbowed my way into it. I think it had been offered to like 2 other people. Both of them had to drop out. I heard there was a free spot, and I was like, hey, buddy, can I hop in? And we ended up taking off into the mountains. The Blue Ridge is gorgeous, and that day it was particularly beautiful. There was a storm that had just passed through, and the sky was just like crispy clear. The weather was perfect. We flew all around the Asheville area, seeing the mountains and valleys, and it was breathtaking. I had personally almost never been in a small plane before, and I had never been in one that small. We were in a Cessna 172, and it was amazing. We were able to navigate just using the terrain around us, and going backpacking here a lot. It was really fun to see all the areas I've hiked in from the air, and be able to direct us around based on, oh yeah, that's Mount Pilot. Oh, that's Devil's Courthouse. Let's turn this way up. Kathy's Creek, whatever it is, and to see it from the air was really cool. And to be able to do it with, the pilot had been my counselor when I was a camper. And I was just loving it and really thankful to be able to be there. In fact, when I woke up in the hospital later, I think one of the first things I told my wife when they took the ventilator off was that I wanted to be a pilot.
You did not.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
That's hilarious.
It made a great impression. And one of the joys, though, is we were also able to fly over the camps and see the places where we worked and got to know each other from the air. And Catalia is our girls' camp is at the top of a very long valley. We flew down the valley, turned around, and flew back up. And one of the issues we ran into as we were flying up was that we couldn't lift. So while we started plenty high at the bottom, we were flying up the valley and we weren't able to correct. And suddenly we were down below the mountains around us and didn't have the space to turn around. And I remember very distinctly the conversation between the pilot and co-pilot, saying, we're going down, and that's obviously a stomach sinking feeling. And it's funny the things that flash through your head when you're, probably going to die. And I remember thinking like, oh shoot, and like starting to lose my cool a little bit. And then a couple things popped into my head simultaneously. One is I had recently been on a plane flight and I had read the card in the back of the seat where it shows the little images of someone bracing for a crash. And I was like, here we go. And the other was, what can I do to live? I was just, I've been married, I think 10 months. And I remember thinking about Bridget, and I remember thinking about camp. We'd only just purchased it from my parents, and thinking like, oh, what can I do to live? And just like took a deep breath, braced against the seat in front of me, and waited for it. And one of the things then that popped into my head was I had some a flashback to kayaking, a big waterfall called Gorilla. And one of my last times paddling it, I had flipped over right in this notch, right at the very top of a large, scary waterfall. And I had just remembered being like, while I was underwater, just thinking, stay calm, and trying to place my paddle to roll back up. And I barely managed to do it on the lip of the waterfall. And as we were going down, I remember thinking, stay calm. Like, let's see what we can do here. And just the similarity of feeling in the gut, like in this, at the top of this huge waterfall or coming down from the air, just like, it's not going to help us to lose our heads. So we started hitting the treetops, and there were a couple things that I knew in my head, which was that nobody was going to see us go down. We were just on the edge of camp's property, far up on the border of the national forest. And I knew that everybody in camp they were down at dinner. It was 6 p.m. almost on the dot. And we started hitting the treetops. And what passed through my head then was, oh, this isn't so bad.
No.
Yeah, well, it felt like a bumpy ride, where you're going too fast on a gravel road. And I was like, this isn't too bad. And then, as far as I can tell, we hit a pretty large tree. We used a drone to measure it out at one point. It was probably around 120 feet. up, and it took most of the left wing off, and we ended up inverting and nosediving and crashed. Um, and from there, it was, you know, I didn't really black out, have a serious concussion, which was pretty amazing. I think I had my wrists up and my head down, and ended up breaking both my wrists pretty badly, but my head was well protected, I guess. Hard headed. And and when I came to more fully, my whole body felt like it was vibrating. Um, it was obviously a catastrophe. There was, everything smelled like gasoline, and there's the plane was crushed and falling apart. And we were upside down. I was hanging by my seatbelt. And one of my first thoughts was that my back was broken. I could just feel it. I ended up having 4 broken vertebrae. I was also really struggling to breathe. I'd collapsed my left lung partially, my right lung more or less fully, and I had broken both my wrists. And my left one was very bad. I actually reached down to unbuckle my seatbelt with my left hand, but was really struggling. And I remember putting it in front of my eyes and just being very shocked at its direction. And so I was able to unbuckle with my right hand, and I was speaking to the guys up front, the pilot and co, and just I think I had being in the back seat, I had the most protection and was the most able to walk and to talk. And I remember they were calling out for help, and it was just like, hey, just hold on. We're gonna be okay. We're gonna try. I'll see if I can get to you. And at first I tried to get out of the door, but I couldn't move that well. I had just too many injuries. And I looked up and noticed that we were at a spot that's used for an outdoor chapel at camp. And I could see the cross. And it wasn't like a huge spiritual religious moment for me. It was just, thank God I know where I am. There's a trail. And I thought for a second that I was going to be stuck in the plane because I couldn't get to the doorway out. But I looked up, and the window that I was looking through was cracked, and I grabbed it with my right hand, which was in better shape, and I was able to punch out the window and crawl out onto the ground there. And from there, I was able to get up and walk around and help one of the guys up front to get out. And we tried to catch our bearings. Both of us were in very bad shape. In addition to my back, lungs, and wrists, I started feeling a terrible burning sensation in my stomach. And it turned out that I had, some internal bleeding that was causing a lot of severe discomfort. And I remember me and the co-pilot were talking, and he was saying, like, you have to go for help. He couldn't walk. He had a broken leg, and he was like, you have to go for help. And I was in a lot of pain. I was like on the ground in a ball. And I remember just while he was talking, just thinking, like, can I stay here? Can I stay here? And thinking through that and realizing there's no reason to think anybody saw the plane go down. And so the choice is really like, we can stay here, and I don't think we're going to make it very long, or we can keep going. Like, I can stand up and see how far I can go, and probably someone will find us sooner. Like, that trail leads to a road. Oh my God. And we ended up, I ended up standing up and starting that journey. So I walked about in total a half mile. And it was just one step at a time. Like, there were at least 3 times that I thought about, that I can think of, that were very distinct moments where I thought about, like, oh, I made it this far. Isn't this good enough? I could sit down here and maybe they'd find me. But each time it was the realization that it was a maybe, and that I could go a little farther. And it was just one more step and one more step. And then it would happen again. It'd be like, oh, I made it to the next, intersection. If I stay here, maybe someone would find me. But then once again, the realization that, it's going to be a while. So you can either stop here and it's a maybe, or you can keep going. And it would just be another step at a time. All the way down a full half mile, I wound up finding some of the camp medical team at our office, and they were our first responders and did a phenomenal job. Called 911 because of how quickly things happened. The plane crash took place. I was able to start walking. It took, maybe 15 minutes for me to get down that half mile, maybe 20. But by the time I got there, they threw me in a car, drove me to the hospital. They called 911. 911 was the emergency response personnel were there within minutes. And within half an hour, the other two people were able to have help as well. And that was one of those moments that was like obviously incredibly challenging and also very clarifying about like, well, I guess the moment didn't even end there. It was still a 2-week saga in the hospital, and then a long time of healing, recovery, and also still trying to be active in our summer camp for the rest of the summer. But what I learned from that was, obviously sometimes the need for grit and to grow that and to foster it in ourselves and our families and friends. And also the incredible beauty of the support of those around you. The community at camp was so responsive, so helpful. And the friends who came out of the woodwork, like that's, when I think back on it, that's still one of the most emotional things for me, is thinking of the people who came to visit and support and be present. Processing an accident like that is a huge ordeal, and knowing that like you don't have to do it alone. I think it was educational to me just how beneficial and beautiful and how significant of a gift it is just to be able to be present to someone who is sick or struggling or in a tough moment in their lives. The tragedy of a crash like that is hard to process, but far better. I don't know how to say this, like quantifying the badness of that with the goodness of like those visits and support. It is far better to have that community, to have that love in your life, to have the direction and the support of those around you, and the gift that is. It was far better to have that. It outweighed all the bad. And that's been one of the things I think coming through the other side that's allowed me to really see it with even that as being a gift of an experience, even knowing that it's going to be like a lifelong thing, that some of these physical issues and they're going to be things that stay with me forever. Still knowing like the gift of the relationships that it was able to help foster, and the depth that it was able to create, and the trust between my wife and I that grew from that so early in our marriage. Even something like that can be a gift, and it's been a wild ride. So,
first off, thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
I got multiple chills throughout your entire story, and so many things come to mind. But man, what a gift you were having this conversation today, man.
Yeah.
Just to recount that, all of the little things, from being able to not lose consciousness, to be able to get through the window, to see the cross and know where you are. I just feel like there's so many things there where it is not by chance that you were alive, that it was divinely appointed that you're here today. And just want to thank you for sharing your story. Yeah, just to give hope in the midst of tragedy, like you said, amidst all of that, what came through was the ability to be around people who were present, were there, that cared, that helped carry you through the hardest times. Because I know there's a lot of people out there who feel like there is no one there for them. I'm sure even humbling for you to, you know, lose
Incredibly.
function of, I mean, I know you lost so much, like so many things, weight, like not have function to be yourself at a camp that you're leading. I mean, tell me a little bit about that, of just like stepping into this humble posture and letting go maybe
Yeah.
of who you were before. I mean, this man who traveled the world and was leading all these trips to then being in this state. Speaking of that a little bit about.
Yeah, well, I would say coming back to camp was definitely humbling and also enlightening, because as someone who tended to be and still does the person who's like, all right, we're gonna run the program this way, I'm the director and we're gonna direct, to come back and be like, okay, I am in a body cast.
Gosh.
From my waist to my neck, and both of my arms were in casts, and I couldn't do anything. And all of a sudden it was like the the value that I was bringing to the community was no longer my ability to direct, it was my presence.
Wow.
And to realize like, oh, well, that was always a value that I could bring to a community, but it wasn't necessarily something that I thought that much about. And I think for each of us, any of us, like just the value of being, like we're in an attention economy where there's a lot demanded of us, and where, once again, where our devices continually tempt us to fragment our attention and send it elsewhere, and to send mixed messages to those around us of like, who's important, the person I'm sitting and talking to, or my phone as it pings and me turning my attention to it and away from you. And to realize like, obviously there's some of that just has to happen with a job, but it's pretty amazing how valuable it is when you can just give your attention to those around you. And I found like being in a body cast, being unable to walk very far at all for quite a while, the rest of that camp season for sure, that what we did was we got back from the hospital 2 weeks later. Our longer session started in July, and I still wanted to be involved in the community and be present to the kids and to the staff as well. And so we bought a couple of like anti-gravity recliner chairs, and we had one at my house, one at my parents' house, and one at our boys' camp on the dining hall front porch. And I would just sit on my porch and visit with people as they came by. And then, sometimes the counselors would come, they'd pick me up, drive me around to our boys' camp. I guess it was pretty much a daily basis thing. And I wasn't able to do very much in terms of physically helping, but I would just talk through things with people like, hey, how's your day going? How are you liking your cabin? And just being able to have those conversations with people rather than focus so much on, are we on time? Are things running close to schedule? I think that was a huge educational experience for me. The gift of just being present to those around you. I think we often mistake our greatest gifts as being like the things we're talented in rather than being ourselves. And relationships aren't between somebody else and the thing you're good at. It's between somebody else and you. And having the vulnerability and the presence to be able to have those conversations and get to know folks on a real level, that's the meaning there. And it's a good thing to develop our talents, and it's valuable, but it's important to realize, like, even in a business or a work setting, so much comes down to just our relationships with those around us and our willingness to be present to those. And just as a disclaimer, I'm not perfect in this, right? I think I still have the same temptations as I did before. Like, even going through something like this, it's not like I'm a new man overnight.
Right.
But what it does is it has provided me a lot of food for thought, for reflection, and for self-correction, to keep in mind what is more important than the schedule is the relationship with our campers, with our staff, with our camp families, with my family, my own family, my wife, my child, my brothers, business partners, friends, like, and not just, I saw that obviously in camp and in my work coming back and in the necessity, because I couldn't do anything else, to just be present, but also knowing like the greatest gifts to me when I was in the hospital trying to get through this. And there were a couple times where we weren't sure I would make it. And the greatest gifts to me in the hospital were the people who came to visit, who just were present and didn't come to offer anything really or say anything. Maybe they dropped off a blanket or a pair of warm socks, but it was just to say hello. And I just imagine that some of them maybe felt like they just, were checking off a box. Maybe it was meaningful for them, maybe it wasn't, but all of them were meaningful for me. Gosh. In a very real way. So
that's beautiful, man. And just to realize like how finite we are, in a moment, to come back. I feel like it's like a second chance. Like you said, you're talking about it, like stepping into the season of life with a whole new lens, and now there's a reason for, why you went down. And now that you're back, I think you're more prepared than ever to be where you are today. Yeah. And before we move off it, I just think that is such a wild experience. I have a couple questions just about that crash specifically.
Absolutely.
I mean, you said it first off, but like going back to the moment of realizing it's going down, you said briefly, like things flashed to your mind, but like bring us to like even the visuals of what you're seeing, of how you're feeling, of you gave a little bit about bracing. Even the fact that you were prepared enough to know to put your wrist up is just crazy in that moment of distress, to have the ability to think. Tell us about that moment visually, emotionally, dig into it a little bit more, and then also giving a little bit of advice to someone to maybe prepare for moments like that, because we don't know when those will come. Like you had a little bit of preparation to even do that, which probably saved your life.
Yeah, I mean, like putting myself back in that seat, it was really a flash. Like from the moment it was like we're going down to the moment we hit the ground couldn't have been more than a minute. It was probably a matter of seconds. And in terms of presence of mind, I don't necessarily know how to prep for that, except to say that I think it's a good thing to put ourselves in situations that are challenging and challenge us to keep our headspace. For myself, I've thought about this many times, because I didn't, like, I remember everything very clearly, and the things that were flashing into my head, like telling myself to stay calm, like just stay calm, stay focused. What can I do? Like what is within my control? I have to imagine for myself that a lot of that came from, backpacking and kayaking and cycling and sports where I found myself in challenging situations often, especially in kayaking and canoeing. When you're on a rapid, you have to have the presence of mind to keep your eyes up, to look for the next line, to look for the next eddy, to, pick a line and to commit to follow through with it. And I think that presence of mind in a challenging situation can probably only be cultivated by putting yourself in challenging situations. And some of those, that might mean like, keeping track of your kids.
Exactly.
Or it might mean, I don't know, it might mean like just having the presence of mind to wake up at your alarm every day, which I don't always do. But knowing that however we foster that, for myself, I felt like that was something that derived from my experience as an outdoorsman, at camp and personally outside of that, to have continued pushing myself and challenging myself. And so as the plane was going down, I think it's appropriate that the things that were popping into my head were moments of like, being at the top of a waterfall and having, flipping over and trying to think about like, okay, stay calm, right the boat, and let's take this facing
this line. Here we go.
And sometimes, well, I think as the plane was crashing, it wasn't a matter of there wasn't time to freak out. It was really just like remain calm, or there's really no other option than
Survival.
just, you're rolling the dice.
Gosh.
And either way, the dice are being rolled, but you can maybe blow on them a little bit, try to get them to the numbers you want.
Yeah.
And I felt like that's what you had to do, is just like try to remain calm and tackle it head on. And I can't speak, trying to put myself back in that plane and express it, like really the best vocabulary I know to share isn't so much like, oh, it was a panic, or it was like, it's like my stomach dropped out and my adrenaline was spiked for sure. But, the things that pop into my head were the most important to me. Like it focused very quickly on what are the important things of life.
Whoa.
And like what popped into my head were, other than like, things that were trying to tell my mind to remain focused, it was like my wife, my work, my family. And, later on, as I was walking out, and I was pretty sure that I was gonna, like, I was like, man, I think at some point I'll sit down and that'll be that, like I did not think that I would make it. I could barely breathe. I think that, as I had a little bit more time, the only other thing that popped into my head that was of major significance was like friendships, especially a couple of them where I was like, I'm not leaving those where I would want to. And to be able to take the time after the crash to live and to be able to reach out to those people, that was a huge blessing. Like I said, I think the thing that I learned most was the power of relationships, of presence, of just being. So
that is beautiful to be able to live to tell the story, to go through that experience, and to be here to share, because I think it's such a message of, we can't control everything that happens to us, the circumstances, but we can prepare and we can remember what's important in our lives, and to be able to have that moment to wake us up, in a sense, to have that new lens to approach life going forward, is such a beautiful gift that you couldn't have gained, but it has been given. And what a beautiful gift to be able to now be there for your wife, to be there for your kids eventually one day, to be here for this camp, for this family. And I have two more questions. And just with that, what would you just say, just as encouragement for anyone out there who is going through something tough? It might not be a plane crash, but just any final words. It could be short, just concise, maybe a couple sentences that come to mind, to remain hopeful, to take the next step when you feel like laying down and you're bleeding and your lungs collapsed. What words would you give that person who's on the ground right there?
I think it's hard to share. I'm somebody who, like, it's very hard for me to share if I'm going through a hard time, what that feels like. But I think, like, don't do it alone. Like, if you can tell those around you, I think I've been surprised by the generosity of people's hearts, and to be able to share that with those around you, to allow them to step in, like people giving of their time, their support. It's a gift to you, and some of us don't like accepting gifts, but it's also a gift to them. Like that provides meaning and significance in both ways, both directions. And while it's difficult to share, it's actually, I think, also a gift to our friends and family, to allow them to help us at times, and to keep that in mind. If we can keep from doing things alone, I don't think we're meant to.
Beautiful. And then just last question is relating to carpe momentum, the phrase "seize the moment."
Yeah.
And I want to kind of close it out with, what does seizing the moment mean to you? What does carpe momentum mean to you, in your own words?
Oh man.
And you kind of touched on it a lot throughout this podcast. There's a lot of different angles, and it can always change. It's changed for me. But what does that mean for you now?
I think knowing on a larger sense, I would go back kind of to where I began. Like through all of this and prior to all of this, like to seize a moment, you kind of have to know your why. And maybe starting by seizing the moment of like asking the question or taking the time to ask the question even of, who do I want to be? Where do I want to be in 5 years, in a month? If I went down in a plane crash today, this is frankly a question I ask myself a lot now. I have a little miniature Cessna 172 toy plane sitting next to my bedside table. And often I think about it. I look at that and I'm like, if I went down again, like, is there anything that I would do differently? Like keeping that in our minds, like, who do we want to be? It doesn't mean that we live perfectly. It doesn't mean that all of our struggles go away. But seizing the moment, I think, for me would mean keeping that vision in mind. Like the mission of our own lives is very important. And taking the silence, taking the time to ask the question and wrestle with that, that's the fundamental thing that'll give direction to our day-to-day lives, our day-to-day actions. I think that's the most important moment to seize.
Love it, man. Well, look, that wraps up our conversation. Thank you for taking the time not only to be here, to be present, but to share your story. I know this will encourage many who listen. So thank you, Jeffrey, for being here.
Thank you, Daniel. Peace.
Thank you. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Carpe momentum.
Seize your moment. The time is now. Seize your moment.